We can now state this without equivocation. PFL has completely botched the Bellator acquisition that took place in November of 2023, and for all of the reasons in which they stated it was going to be monumental, none of those have proven to be true, and more to the point, they now have lost Patchy, a bantamweight, one of the guys who was a key feature in terms of the acquisition, not merely for that bantamweight division, but more broadly, the suite of champions that they were buying. His departure is a complete indictment on the way in which they have constructed their product. Let's talk about it. First things first, in a statement last night by the PFL, they acknowledged that they have basically parted ways with Patchy. We knew that this might be happening. Other fighters have left PFL. Ryan Bader left PFL. Aaron Pico left PFL. Patricio Pitbull left PFL under slightly different circumstances all the way through. But Patchy had been sounding the alarm about sitting on the shelf during his prime for so long. In the course of since the acquisition to this day, only having one fight in the PFL. We'll talk about what that means in just a second. It is a complete disaster for the PFL that they have lost yet another key piece of the Bellator puzzle. And to the point, you have to now ask yourself, what was the point of the Bellator acquisition if several key aspects of it, the then heavyweight champion of Bellator, the bantamweight champion, obviously Patricio Pitbull, Chris Cyborg, she's still there, but she's only fought one time. We'll talk about that in just a second. What was the point of acquiring that roster and making a big to-do about it if you cannot leverage the existing talent that you have? Numerous fighters who were acquired from Bellator in the last 18 months have been very, very clear that they have not been able to get fights on a consistent basis in order to advance their careers. Understand something. In November of 2023, just after, essentially, right around the time in which he won the Bantamweight Grand Prix in Bellator, was right around the same time, not long after that PFL ultimately acquired Bellator. Since that time, 18 months, Patchy has fought one time for them. He'll be 32 in August. So in other words, the second half of the core part of his prime has largely been punted away due to PFL's inability to make effective use of this. Just consider something. I'm going to put some numbers here along with some names up on the screen. This is the current UFC top 15, and these are all the fights they've had basically since November of 2023. Now, of course, I'm not counting that month, but from December 2023 or certainly 2024 on, these are all the fights they've had. Merab had two. There are, three. There are a couple of guys that have only had, or many guys, I should say, that have only had two, but there are none that have had one. And in the case of Bautista, he's going to have three because his next bout is scheduled for UFC 316. Figueiredo had 5, and then you can see down the line, Sandhagen 3, Umar 3, Song Yadong 3, Zahabi even had 3, and then even Lokdog, Vinicius Oliveira had 3. Let's now look at a different list. These are some of the bigger names that were picked up in the Bellator acquisition by PFL, and where are they now, and how many fights have they had? Cyborg has had one fight in MMA anyway during that time. Ryan Bader had one. He now goes to Ryzen. Pico had one. He's now gone. Pitbull had one. He's now gone. Now, they did make and have made effective use of Jason Jackson. He's had 3. AJ McKee, I should say. Antonio's son, he's had 2. That's fine. But Corey Anderson has had 1. Usman Nurmagomedov has had 2. And more to that point, the second one he had was absolutely thrilling beyond all imagination, and they couldn't make it work for him at all since then. They've not built on that. Paul Hughes has had another one. Paul Hughes, by the way, not a Bellator acquisition. He's had about 4 fights in this time. I looked it up. But they haven't built on this. So he's had, what I would consider to be the bare minimum number of fights since that time, but they aren't leveraging it in a way to be more consistent, to build on any kind of momentum. And then Nurmagomedov has only had 1 fight during that time. These were basically your Bellator champs. Now, Johnny Eblen, I think, has had a couple of fights in that time, so they're making some effective use of him. We'll see how it goes. But we're not talking about an overwhelming amount of fighters to make use of here. And more to that point, the vast majority of them couldn't get what they were looking for, with some exception that more or less proves the rule. What is the point of acquiring a roster and then in your press release telling the world that you have the same number of ranked fighters as the UFC, if you cannot make effective use of them, now many of them are gone. The ones that are still there have only fought one time in 18 months with no prospects for when they might fight again. It's absolute insanity. Now, I don't know if they spent a bunch of money to get it. There's different reports about how they were ultimately able to acquire it, and they seem to have gotten it for largely cheap. And I've seen people say, well, maybe they found out that these guys were more expensive on their Bellator deals and they didn't want them. That was something they could have figured out much earlier. It did not take, heading this November towards 2 years for us to be able to figure out exactly what value they contributed, how worthwhile that was to them. And again, what is the point of signing premier talent if you're now belly aching about how much they cost? Yeah, if you want cheap talent who can compete more regularly on your tournaments, you can find plenty of that. If you want to sign premier talent like Pico, and Pitbull sort of at the end of his run, but certainly has been premier talent, and Patchy Mix, by all indications, appears to be premier talent, what is the point of signing them if after the fact you're like, oh, actually we decided they're too expensive for us? Premier talent is expensive. Either be in the business of paying for that kind of thing or don't. It just didn't have to be this way. Again, putting aside the point of like, I don't understand why you would acquire a talent that is premier, or at least perceived to be premier, and then bellyache about the cost afterwards. I don't quite get that. But even just putting that aside, here's the relevant issue. The relevant issue is that they've constructed their product in such a way that they have such fealty to the tournament system that they can't figure out how to otherwise make effective use of talent that doesn't fit into that tournament system. Yeah, if you want to go through the tournament, they can make very effective use of you. But if you don't go through the tournament, you're just kind of left in limbo all the time. You're kind of left in this no man's land. Folks, look at this list. This is the list of all the PFL events that have taken place since the acquisition of Bellator. There's 27 on this list. Now, I'm not even counting some of those Bellator Championship Series events, not even including that. So if we throw that in there, there's 30 or more actually, and you might be able to shave off the PFL Europe 4-1, which took place at the 3 Arena, because that was 1 month after Patchy Mix had won the Bellator Bantamweight Grand Prix. Fine. We're still talking about basically 30 events in the course of that time, and they fit him into one. Guys, the Patchy Mix scenario has laid bare the poverty, essentially, of the PFL's content structure. Because they are so committed to the tournament, and they have no real other way to promote around that very effectively. They have tried it. They have had PFL versus Bellator. They've had another Francis Ngannou fight after that. They've had a couple of things that they've done along the way. They certainly have the PFL Europe series, which appears to be decent to good even. But they cannot consistently apply themselves beyond the tournament system. They don't know how to do it. They're stuck into it. And as a consequence, they cannot seem to get out of their own way and realize that that thing where they're just pumping out tournaments and they're not putting crown jewels at the top of that card, not only is it causing a talent exodus, but more to the point, look at the press release that they put out in November of 2023, bragging about the number of vehicles that they have internally in the company to showcase talent. Like, it's not just the Champions League series where they have PFL MENA, PFL Africa, PFL Europe, and everything else, and they're going to have all those things come together. Again, when that's going to be, who knows. But more to the point, look at the different products that they say that they have to feature all different kinds of talent. But now we know that's really not true. Yeah, they have different elements to the PFL brand. That part is true. And again, it's not to say all of it works or all of it doesn't. But how can it be that you can brag about the various ways in which your product can be differentiated, can be diversified, the portfolio of what you have, and yet you can't meet the needs of a certain kind of fighter? Premier talent, not in a tournament. It completely destroys the argument. It totally undercuts what they have. In fact, what it ends up doing is just showing how confusing all of this is at the end of the day. At the end of the day, it just really underscores to me that their claims that they have all of those things is kind of that old adage about the quarterback. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. If you have 5 products within your brand, you really have none. Again, with some exceptions here or there, UFC can pull it off, but they're a monopoly in the space. Of course they can pull it off. They're the 800-pound gorilla. PFL has all of these different products, and basically only one or two of them work. PFL Europe works. PFL MENA's sort of doing something. Obviously, the tournament system, you can say whether it's good or it's bad, but it functions. They can't make anything else work. And now Premier Talent wants to leave, and they are leaving. You now lost a bantamweight who wasted 18 months of his career, or almost 18 months. He did have one fight, but a big stretch of his prime just sitting around because they would rather hold on to a structure that doesn't make use of that kind of fighter. Yet they went to great lengths to sign and buy essentially the services of those kinds of fighters for reasons that now remain totally unclear, because what value did they actually get from it? I don't know how to answer that. The whole point was about to make a huge roster. It doesn't look to me like they've done that. Now, again, Jason Jackson has been something of interesting. Phil Davis had a great PFL debut. There's been a few things that have worked for them. Johnny Eblin, we'll see. But to me, I think we can now, with the departure of Patchy Mix, declare very easily they did not, PFL, handle the Bellator acquisition very well, and their claims that they have all these products within the portfolio of their content offerings to make use of all these different kinds of fighters, the tournament fighter, the Bellator fighter, the championship fighter, doesn't work. Didn't work. And now they're shedding the most interesting parts of their roster as a consequence. PFL fumbled the Bellator acquisition. They fumbled it. They decided to hitch their wagon to a model so, not just strongly, but so without reservation, without the flexibility they need to really leverage these talents, that now they're gone. They wasted their time. PFL wasted their own time. And now where are we as a consequence? What did we really gain from this PFL Bellator acquisition? Do we feel like it was a game changer? Do we feel like it meaningfully added a lot? They cut guys like Mousasi because they were too expensive? Yeah, fine, cut them. It's not be too expensive. But Patchy Mix cannot be that expensive, and there is still a significant amount of upside to his career, which I'm guessing will now take place for the rest of the big part of it in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. It didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be such commitment to a structure, to this grand vision of diversity, such that you can't even use them in the end. They botched it. They fumbled it. Congratulations to Patchy Mix, who I'm guessing is going to be in the UFC next. What a mess.